Please welcome Max Bearak, International Climate Policy Reporter, and his guests, Jacqueline Novogratz, founder and CEO of Acumen, and Damilola Ogunbiyi, CEO and Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Sustainable Energy for All, and the co-chair of UN Energy.
These are deep chairs.
Yeah. Well, thank you both for being here. Everyone in this room has been hearing quite a bit in the last panel about the unstoppable growth of renewable energy around the world. But we're here to talk about, primarily, I think, the many people who don't have that kind of access yet. Nearly 1 billion people don't have access to clean cooking fuel, and 600 million or more than that don't have access to electricity. That number is rising. And I'm hoping, Damilola, you could start us off by just explaining how the hell that we're in that situation still. It's truly shocking.
So it's even more depressing. It's about 2.35 billion people that don't have access to clean cooking. And why clean cooking is so important is that it affects women more. So about 500,000 women in my continent die from not having access to clean cooking fuels. So if you sit back and think about this, a woman who wants to feed her family is having fumes that might make her die more prematurely. So just wanted to talk that, when we talk about electrification, we have to talk about clean cooking at the same time. But in terms of electrification, thanks to people like Jacqueline, the World Bank, things that we've done, we've actually have made progress. When I started this about 10 years ago, I think we were about 1.2, 1.3 billion people that didn't have access to electrification. So it's getting better. The issue is, where's the finance? What is happening with finance? So we know, clean energy finance is going to surpass 2.2 trillion this year, and it's really exciting. But only 15% of that is for the developing world. But more staggering, only 2% of that is for the African continent, where is the place that all these people will be, and it's the fastest growing economy as well, and it's where all the young people are going to be born. So that's how we have to look at things, that the financing isn't getting to the places that really, really need to solve the problems. We have things like, obviously, population growth, and we have policy, but more important, we haven't made it accessible enough for the real financing that we need to solve these issues to really get into the developing world, especially Africa. And
quickly, what gives? Why 2% for Africa, when Africa, of course, makes up so much more of the world population?
I think it's, global priority sometimes. And, it's people don't see Africa as the issue. We live in a society, unfortunately, more and more people just think, I'm just going to solve my own problem. And then, over there under that line, they will solve their own problem. But what we've seen with climate change and what we've seen about what's going on around the world is that we're all part of a commonwealth. And even if you got climate neutral in your own country, if you don't sort out the issues that are happening in another country or help to be part of this whole global system, these issues will persist. And when you think about the continent of Africa, energy reduction or access to energy is the same thing as climate action. It's one of the same. Because if you do not spend time, what happens, and is happening in many parts of the continent, is they are getting access to energy, but it's with very dirty fuels, with petrol and diesel. And also deforestation is happening at an alarming rate because people are cutting down trees, because that is also their source of energy. So again, everything we do is interlinked.
Thanks. Jacqueline, maybe you could talk a bit about the kinds of conversations that you have with financial institutions. A lot look at developing countries as too risky, too low return. Their money could make more money elsewhere, so why invest it in a risky proposition? Do you hear a lot of, okay, we'll do that, but it's kind of a tokenism or almost like a CSR type of thing? Or are there institutions that are actually beginning to see investing in Malawi as just as good as investing anywhere else?
Well, I think the first piece of your question is really about leadership, and people like Damilola, Adibanga, African Development Bank through M300 are leading in new ways and saying, this is a priority, we have to do this. And M300 has really been a part of the reason that we've seen a tripling of imports from China into Africa of solar panels.
And maybe you could explain what Mission 300, so Mission 300 is.
Well, here's the woman who should explain it just quickly. But
so Mission 300 is the World Bank and the African Development Bank's effort to make sure 300 million Africans are connected to electricity by 2030. I have to note that there are more than 300 million that don't have electricity. There are about 565 million as well. So it is a big, grand effort across countries, and Jacqueline is one of the key private sector players in that effort.
Well, thank you. To your question, Max, I would say, and it picks up on what Damilola was saying, that climate finance isn't scarce. As Damilola said, more than $2 trillion went into the energy transition. It's scared. It's 0.1% actually has gone to off-grid solar of that number. When in fact, if you're looking at very low-income people, which is what we look at, that is what they are needing. That is the way that we will electrify the hardest-to-reach markets of Africa. I think that it's time for all of us, including the financial institutions, to ask not just what is the risk of daring, because there are lots, macroeconomic headwinds, very low-income people, poor distribution, but what is the risk of not daring? Rising emissions, to Damilola's point, rising instability, rising migration. What's exciting to me, and it is through efforts like M300 and visionary leaders, is that we are seeing a shift of financial institutions coming together across the capital spectrum. And I should just say quickly, what we do at Acumen is we invest from angels through what we call early stage patient capital, take philanthropy, invest 10 to 15 years to build markets that have never existed, and then lended finance. And just yesterday, we announced a $250 million initiative, 23 stakeholders, from philanthropists to impact investors to the Green Climate Fund and the World Bank and the IFC and BII to the largest commercial bank in Korea, all coming together to amass this kind of capital so that we have the ability to invest in the 16 of the most challenging energy markets in Africa. Places like Malawi with a 16% electrification rate, Chad, South Sudan, Burkina Faso, Benin. About a month ago, we made our first loan into Somalia. These are not investments for the faint of heart, yet there are people who are paying and are willing to pay. There are companies that understand these markets. There are local entrepreneurs. What we need is to put together the right kind of capital to solve the right problem. And that is happening.
What have you found to be the most convincing argument to get some of those institutions to do that investment? Why is that happening?
So sometimes we throw huge amounts of money around as to what is actually needed. If you look at the investing that we've done over the last 17 years just in off-grid solar, through 40 companies, one nonprofit global investing institution has been able to reach about 300 million low-income people with light and solar. It's not at the M300 is looking at, we're at the harder part now than what was done. Went from going to, at one point when we were at 1.5 billion to where we are now with about 600 million. But this is possible. It is feasible. Companies are profitable. We need the right kind of capital stacks and put them into the right entrepreneurs, and frankly, then use the social capital that we are starting to see, the skills, the networks, and I would say that that institutions are comprised of people, and so we need to find those people who are willing to do the work.
So to Jacqueline's point and to your question, I would think it's also unfair how people measure risk in the developing countries compared to how they measure risk in the developed world. If we looked at energy deals that have failed and people not paying back, it really hasn't been in the developing world. You have to understand, when someone gets access to energy in their small SME shop, they're in that shop for like 16 hours a day. that is their livelihood. We've seen like maybe a 2% default rate, and that isn't factored into the equations. You know, they just look at this is the country level risk and everything changes there. And it also affects the cost of capital. So local entrepreneurs looking at, you know, 25 to 30% to borrow to provide power to the most vulnerable people, while international companies are looking at about maybe 2%. So it's not an equal playing field. And things Jacqueline's trying to do, and a lot of other organizations, is how to make that money more accessible so you can actually work at scale. You know, how to make more local currency available, because that's how people pay back. If we're hedging everything on the dollar and something happens and and it always happens, there's an issue and a devaluation, you can't go back to someone and say, sorry, I'm just going to spend 5x. You have to pay 5x more to your electricity bill because, you know, something happened somewhere around the world that you have no access to. So it's kind of understanding that kind of local knowledge. I also think this is really the best time. Some of us have worked in this space for like 10, 15 years. So we're all kind of converging to say, we're all going to focus on this mission, and we are going to create a marketplace, and it's not just going to be continuous grant and continuous aid. But the last point I want to talk about is a lot of projects in the developed world are still subsidized. A lot of wind, solar projects are still subsidized. I don't know why when we talk about Africa, we want it to all be market ready, and we don't want to give some of the grant capital that Jacqueline needs to bring down the cost to make it available to the local people. So I think there's a level of hypocrisy when it comes to the developing world that stops some of these things to happen at scale.
Well, Mission 300 really does seem like the hard part. I mean, just to be frank about it, the timeline is to do it by 2030. That means millions, I think around 5 million on average, would have to come online every month between now and 2030, which is a huge task. But beyond the task, which takes money, as you were explaining, how much of that ends up being green energy, if you will? What does it end up looking like?
I can speak from my own experience, which is all green. It's all solar. There is no energy source on the planet as cost efficient as solar, and low-income people who don't have energy want energy. Right now, they spend a lot more than that on kerosene and on diesel. And so this is a huge opportunity if they can get access to the kind of solar energy that is required. And what I think there's two things that are really important, and it may connect to why sometimes the international institutions aren't investing. If you are living in a community where everything is dark when the sun goes down, there's no studying, there's no productive use of your time. It impacts your health. Every single level of your life is impacted in very deep ways. Forget about the economy. The whole economy depends on it. So we think about electrification as light and maybe a cell phone. Mm-hmm. This is about irrigation for droughts, which are increasingly happening across the African continent. This is about cooling, not only for market women so that they can sell their fish and their chicken and not lose their whole livelihood when there's a constant heat waves, but also for medicines. This is about having a phone so that when there are floods, you can find your way to help. Electricity used to be seen as a sideshow. Electricity is at the heart of what it means to create an economy, and that is why we're so focused on it. And I actually have a vision for Africa, even though I'm not African. I've worked there for 40 years, and it is a place where I see some of the most incredible innovation and sense of the possible of anywhere I've ever worked. That this is a continent that has the ability to show the rest of the world what a green economy can look like. Kenya's already done it in ways that allow every single person a generator on their rooftop. The adjacent possible starting to happen. Absolutely. All these other products. We've invested in an electric motorcycle company that already will have 11,000 motorcycles on the streets of Kenya and Rwanda. I wish we could get them into New York City. This is really about investing in the future of our world, because this is the biggest planetary market failure that we have.
Absolutely. And to Jacqueline's point, I think everyone just always looks at what are the technologies they can bring into the developing world, like Africa, instead of what Africa can give the rest of the world. Like Jacqueline said, I mean, the Kenyan grid is 92% renewable today. You know, that's what it is, and it's probably going to get better. In terms of, you know, the power pools connecting Southern African power pools, connecting countries, allowing renewables to come in at a scale that they haven't come. Again, that is coming from Africa. A lot of innovation is coming from Africa. I just feel that, you know, sometimes people don't really realize how bad things are. We're just talking about basic electricity. The average American uses, 13,000 kilowatt hours? Like, this place is freezing when you talk about efficiency, right? And the average African, if you have energy, you know, sorry, I've been going around New York freaking out with the efficiency levels. But the average African, when you have energy, is using 400 kilowatts. There's no way you can develop a society and say low energy, high productivity. So it's really, really important that we need to get enough energy to people to live a productive life. You know, that is why energy and electricity in the SDGs is responsible for about 2/3 of the SDGs, because we know if that isn't solved, you're not going to achieve all your other just human targets. And we have to really think about human beings at this time. It has to be about people and planet.
Jacqueline, I said I wasn't going to ask you about Trump, and this is not asking you...
promised me.
Yeah, this is not asking you to react to what he said yesterday, but of course, this administration has been threatening to claw back funding for nonprofits that work in climate change and really seems quite sensitive to the language of climate change. And I'm curious how that is playing out in the kind of donor class that you interact with a lot. Like, are you seeing people trying to kind of change the way that they talk about this? Is that actually potentially a good thing for energy access, which is in some ways deploying a different kind of language than the language of climate change?
Well, so look, make no mistake, the way that aid was turned off like this has cost and will cost millions of people to suffer and die. That's a reality. We can hold that truth and also hold the truth that I started Acumen 21 years ago, in part because I believed in markets, but I saw that markets alone weren't going to solve the problems of poverty. And I had seen how aid too often creates dependence, and that there was another way. We need all sorts of capital. I think that this is and I think have been trained my whole life that all around us are enormous opportunities. They're disguised as intractable problems. And so the opportunity that we have right now is that nobody's coming for us. We are seeing institutions like the 23 that have come together for the Hardest to Reach Fund, bringing electrification to 72 million Africans in new ways, a blend of capital, unapologetic about the philanthropy that's needed, the patient capital that's needed, the commercial capital that's needed. I think this is part of our future. And so are we seeing African leadership coming forward to say, we don't want to depend on any other region, and certainly not ever again. And so this is a new conversation that is emerging, and it's a really exciting time to be a part of it, while we also have to make a commitment as a world. And Damilola said it, this is not an African problem. This is a global problem. It is a productivity problem. It is a human problem. It is a moral problem. And so we have the entrepreneurs, we have the technologies, we have the capital. What we're lacking is the moral imagination. What we're lacking is the will to put the pieces together. And the hope comes from recognizing that new relationships are starting to form that are getting very serious about results.
I'm in Africa. I'm Nigerian. I thrive on crisis. So I think there's a privilege where everything is all normal. That's not my reality. So I think we work best in crisis and disruption, and that's just what we'll do. We will get on with it. and we'll do our jobs and we'll find new ways, and that's where innovation comes in. Yeah, I see a silver lining in everything, and I see the opportunities, and I also see how people's mind have just shifted. And now it's just like, how are we going to solve it? How are we going to solve it?
Let's get on with it.
You all have to be together to have this kumbaya. It's not going to happen. So let's just get on with it.
Are there examples, quickly, we only have a little bit of time, that really jump out to you of African leadership on this?
Absolutely. Like, you know, we're now having the African sovereign wealth institutions and pension funds and people like that putting money into energy and infrastructure. We never had that a year ago, but they realize they have to do it now. Because if they're meant to protect the futures of Africans, they need to invest in them now. So I always use a good crisis for good. So
that's why we were separated at birth.
Yeah, it's just what we have to do. We can't just dwell on it. We just have to move forward.
All right. Well, thank you both for an illuminating conversation.